I rescued George when he was 2 years old.
He's not.
Got your message about George, you okay?
I don't know.
No, he's definitely bigger. I need to find someone who knows exactly...
Are you familiar with genetic editing?
Where's George? I need to see him.
He is dangerous.
We're gonna die!
Probably!
We've created the next chapter.
Incoming!
Sound the alarm, it's time to cross the line. Oh, somebody stop.
It's time we throw everything we can at these things.
What if one experiment turned a gentle gorilla into a giant, unstoppable monster? Foster in Rampage 2018, you'll discover insane action, hidden facts, and surprising movie details you probably missed. You're watching Reviews Wala. Don't blink because this review is about to go wild. Rampage is a 2018 American sci fi monster movie that is loosely based on the classic Rampage video game series by Midway Games. The movie stars Dwayne Johnson with Naomi Harris, Malin Akerman, Jake Lacey, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan in supporting roles. It was directed by Brad Payton and written by Ryan Engel, Carlton Cuse, Ryan J. Condal, and Adam Stickiel. The story follows a primatologist named Davis Okoye and his best friend George, a rare white gorilla. When a dangerous genetic experiment goes wrong, George and two other animals are infected by a powerful gene changing substance that turns them into massive, angry monsters with constantly changing sizes. Davis teams up with others to stop the giant creatures before they destroy the city of Chicago. Rampage is the third and final movie that brought together director Brad Payton and Dwayne Johnson. Their previous films were Journey to The Mysterious Island 2012 and San Andreas 2015, making this their final collaboration as a trilogy of action adventure movies. Filming for the movie started in April 2017 in Chicago. Rampage was released in theaters across the United States on April 13, 2018 by Warner Brothers Pictures. The movie received mixed reviews from critics, with some praising the fun action and visual effects while others criticized the story. Even so, it was a big success at the box office, earning about $428 million dollars worldwide against a production budget of around $120, $140 million. Back in 1993, scientists introduced CRISPR, short for clustered regularly, interspaced short palindromic repeats, a groundbreaking gene editing technology that gave doctors hope for treating diseases that were once thought impossible to cure. But by 2016, experts also realized how dangerous it could be if it fell into the wrong hands. Because of its ability to change DNA, CRISPR was even classified as a potential weapon of mass destruction and proliferation due to the risk of misuse. The story begins aboard Athena 1, a research space station owned by the gene editing company Energene. Disaster strikes when a lab rat named Larry is accidentally mutated into a giant, terrifying monster that tears through the station, killing almost everyone on board. Dr. Kerry Atkins, Marley Shelton, is the only survivor. Before the station is destroyed, Energene's CEO, Claire Wyden, Malin Akerman, orders Kerry to recover several canisters containing the company's secret genetic research. Claire even locks Kerry's escape pod remotely, refusing to let her leave until the canisters are secured. She coldly tells Carrie to bring back the research or not come back at all. Carrie manages to escape with three canisters just as the station explodes. But during her escape, the mutated rat damages the pod's front window. As the pod re enters Earth's atmosphere, the cracked window shatters from the intense heat, killing Carrie instantly. The pod breaks apart, scattering debris across the United States. One canister lands in the Florida Everglades, where it's swallowed by a huge American crocodile. Another crashes into a forest in Wyoming, exposing a gray wolf to the dangerous pathogen. Meanwhile, primatologist Davis Okoye Dwayne Johnson, a former US Army Special Forces soldier who also worked with an anti poaching unit, takes care of animals at a wildlife preserve in San Diego. His closest friend is George, a rare white western lowland gorilla that Davis rescued years earlier after poachers killed George's mother. The two share a special bond and even communicate through sign language. George loves pulling harmless pranks on Davis by pretending to be angry before revealing he's just joking. Davis has taught George about family, loyalty, and protecting those who can't protect themselves. One night, one of the fallen canisters crashes directly into George's habitat. Curious, George is exposed to the mysterious genetic pathogen. Soon, George begins growing much larger than normal and becomes more aggressive every day. Davis discovers that George has broken into the grizzly bear enclosure and killed a full grown bear with his bare hands. While searching the habitat, Davis finds the empty canister and realizes something is terribly wrong. Around the same time, genetic engineer Dr. Kate Caldwell, Naomi Harris, tracks Davis down after seeing news reports about the destroyed space station and the strange behavior of the gorilla. Kate explains that she helped develop the gene editing pathogen for Energene, hoping it could cure deadly diseases. But she later discovered the company planned to use it as a biological weapon instead. When she tried to expose them, Energene framed her, sent her to prison, and during that time, her terminally ill brother died. The explosion of the space station causes Energene's stock price to drop by 20%. However, Claire reviews footage from the escape pod and realizes the research canisters survived re entry. After hearing reports of a meteor crash in Wyoming, she figures out where another canister landed. Since Project Rampage successfully worked in space, all she needs now is to recover the infected animals. George escapes captivity and goes on a destructive rampage through the wildlife preserve. Davis manages to calm him down, but a government team led by Agent Harvey Russell, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, captures George and loads him onto a military cargo plane. At the same time, Claire and her brother Brett, Jake Lacey, send a team of mercenaries led by Burke, Joe Manganiello, to capture the mutated wolf now called Ralph. The mission goes horribly wrong, and every mercenary is brutally killed. Wanting to recover the infected animals and hide Energy's crimes, Claire activates a giant transmitter on top of Chicago's Willis Tower. The mutated creatures were genetically programmed to become extremely aggressive whenever they hear a certain sound frequency. Claire doesn't care that millions of innocent people are in danger. The signal attracts George and Ralph straight towards Chicago. George reacts violently to the sound, breaks free, and causes the military plane to crash. Davis, Kate, and Agent Russell barely escape by parachuting to safety. George survives the crash and joins Ralph as both giant creatures head towards Chicago. Davis and Kate convince Russell to help them steal a military medical helicopter so they can reach the city before the monsters. By the time they arrive, George and Ralph are already destroying downtown Chicago. Things get even worse when the mutated crocodile, Lizzie, emerges from the river and joins the attack, leaving the military completely overwhelmed. Davis and Kate break into Energene's headquarters inside Willis Tower, hoping to steal a serum that can reverse the mutations. They manage to grab several doses but are caught by Claire and Brett. Claire reveals the shocking truth: the serum won't return the animals to normal, it only removes their aggressive behavior. She then shoots Davis, leaving him badly wounded, but he survives. As George climbs the tower and tears it apart, Claire forces Kate to come with her at gunpoint while ordering Davis to distract George. During the escape, Kate secretly slips one of the serum containers into Claire's handbag before shoving her toward George. George grabs Claire and eats her alive, accidentally swallowing the serum as well. George, Ralph, and Lizzie destroy the sound transmitter, causing the top of Willis Tower to collapse. Davis and Kate narrowly survive by flying a damaged helicopter away from the falling building. Knowing the battle isn't over, Davis stays behind to help George fight the remaining monsters, while Kate and Russell race to stop the military from dropping a massive GBU 43 BMOAB bomb on the city. George battles Ralph, while Davis tricks the giant wolf into charging toward Lizzie. The massive crocodile snaps Ralph's head off with one powerful bite before turning her attention to Davis. George jumps in to save his friend, giving Davis enough time to climb into an abandoned AH-64 Apache helicopter. Davis unloads the helicopter's machine guns and rockets into Lizzie, but the giant crocodile keeps fighting. During the final battle, Lizzie nearly kills Davis. At the last second, George grabs a huge iron bar and drives it straight through Lizzie's eye, killing her even though the metal almost impales him as well. With all three monsters defeated, the military calls off the airstrike just in time. Davis reunites with Kate, Russell, and George, and together they begin helping rescue civilians as the city slowly recovers from the devastating attack. Casting Dwayne Johnson's attachment as Davis Okoye formed the foundation of the entire casting strategy for Rampage. Announced in June 2015, Johnson's involvement immediately positioned the project as a high profile new line cinema production under the Flynn Picture Company and Seven Bucks Productions banners. Johnson, already established as a reliable box office draw through previous collaborations with director Brad Payton on Journey to The Mysterious Island and San Andreas, brought not only star power but also a specific character archetype that shaped subsequent choices. Davis Okoye was conceived as a former US Army Special Forces operative turned primatologist who maintains an unusually close bond with a rare albino western lowland gorilla named George. The role demanded an actor capable of conveying both physical dominance and emotional vulnerability, particularly in non-verbal interactions involving sign language with the animal. Johnson's background as a professional wrestler and action lead made him a natural fit. Yet the casting also leveraged his off screen persona as an animal advocate and larger than life figure whose presence could anchor the film's blend of spectacle and sentiment. The decision to pair Johnson with an Oscar nominated actress for the female lead reflected a deliberate effort to elevate the material beyond standard blockbuster fare. Naomi Harris was cast as Dr. Catherine Kate Caldwell in January 2017, shortly after her Academy Award nomination for Moonlight. Harris's selection was driven by the need for a geneticist character who could hold her own intellectually and emotionally opposite Johnson's more reticent primatologist. Caldwell is portrayed as a discredited scientist whose prior work at the Energene Corporation involved the very pathogen that mutates the animals. The role required an actress who could deliver exposition about CRISPR technology and genetic engineering while maintaining audience investment through wit, determination, and moral complexity. Harris has spoken about deliberately choosing the project to avoid typecasting after Moonlight, seeking a part that was 100 million miles away from the troubled mother she had just played. Her presence added credibility to the scientific elements and created a dynamic in which Caldwell must earn Okoye's trust, rather than simply serving as a conventional romantic interest. Producers noted that Harris brought real weight to the role, making the scientific dialogue feel grounded rather than perfunctory. Malin Akerman's casting as Claire Wyden, the primary human antagonist, occurred during the same mid 2017 assembly of supporting roles. Wyden is the ruthless CEO of Energene, the company responsible for the pathogen that transforms George, the wolf Ralph, and the crocodile Lizzie into city destroying monsters. The character is written as an ice queen figure, intelligent, calculating, and ultimately self destructive, whose plan involves using an ultrasonic signal to lure the mutated animals to Chicago. Okerman's background in both comedy and dramatic roles, including Watchmen, allowed her to inject a degree of theatrical flair into the villainy without tipping into caricature. Casting notes and set reports indicate that her chemistry with Jake Lacey, who plays her dim witted brother Brett Wyden, was a key factor. The sibling dynamic provided opportunities for comic relief amid the destruction, with Brett serving as a neurotic foil whose incompetence contrasts sharply with Claire's cold efficiency. Ackerman's performance was designed to make the corporate villainy feel personal and theatrical, ensuring the human conflict remained as memorable as the monster action. Jeffrey Dean Morgan joined the production as Harvey Russell, a government agent working for an ambiguous other government agency. Morgan's casting, finalized in the early months of 2017, brought a weathered, authoritative presence that balanced Johnson's more straightforward heroism. Russell functions as both an ally and a source of institutional friction, initially treating Okoye and Caldwell with suspicion before forming an uneasy partnership. Morgan's recent high profile work on The Walking Dead had established him as an actor capable of projecting quiet intensity and moral ambiguity, qualities that suited a character who operates in the gray areas of government response to an unprecedented biological threat. Producers specifically highlighted the visual and dramatic weight Morgan brought to scenes opposite Johnson, noting that the two actors' physical presence and contrasting styles created compelling face to face confrontations. The role also allowed Morgan to display dry humor, particularly in exchanges that underscored the bureaucratic absurdity of the situation. Joe Manganiello was brought on to play Burke, the leader of a private military team hired by Energene. Manganiello's physicality and action hero credentials made him a logical choice for a character who represents the corporate interest in containing or exploiting the mutated animals. Burke's role is relatively limited in screen time, functioning primarily as an early antagonist whose team attempts to capture George. The casting decision appears to have prioritized an actor who could credibly threaten both the animals and the protagonist in close quarters combat sequences. Manganiello's presence added a layer of muscular professionalism to the private security element, distinguishing it from the more institutional military response led by other characters. Jake Lacey's portrayal of Brett Wyden completed the central human villainy. Lacey, known for roles that often blend comedy with underlying pathos, was cast to emphasize Brett's neurotic incompetence. The character's inability to manage even basic technical tasks provides comic contrast to Claire's competence and heightens the sense that Energini's leadership is fundamentally unstable. Lacey's casting contributed to the film's tonal balance, ensuring that the corporate antagonists were not uniformly menacing, but instead a mix of calculating ambition and hapless entitlement. Marley Shelton took on the role of Dr. Kerry Atkins, a scientist and astronaut, whose early appearance establishes the pathogen's origin in a space laboratory accident. Shelton's brief but pivotal scenes required an actress who could convey both professional competence and the sudden terror of the experiment's failure. Her casting added a layer of established supporting player reliability to the opening sequence, grounding the film's scientific premise before the action escalates. PJ Byrne was cast as Nelson, a scientist and friend of Okoye at the San Diego Wildlife Sanctuary. Byrne's comedic background, including work in The Wolf of Wall Street, allowed him to provide lighter moments in the early zoo sequences while still functioning as a competent professional. The role required an actor who could interact believably with both Johnson and the motion capture performance of George, helping establish the sanctuary as a place of genuine care rather than mere exposition. Demetrius Gross appeared as Colonel Blake, a military officer involved in the response to the rampaging animals. Gross's casting contributed to the film's representation of institutional authority, providing a more conventional military presence that contrasts with Morgan's more shadowy government agent. Jack Quaid played Connor, one of Okoye's younger colleagues at the sanctuary, while Brian Hill portrayed Amy, another member of the sanctuary staff. Both roles helped flesh out the early environment and the personal stakes for Okoye before the crisis begins. Matt Gerald was cast as Zamit, a member of Burke's private military team, while Will Yoon Lee appeared as Agent Park, another government operative. Urija Faber, a mixed martial arts fighter, took on the role of Garrick, one of the private military contractors, bringing authentic physical presence to the combat sequences. Bruce Blackshear played Taylor, another member of the team. These supporting military and security roles were filled with actors who could convincingly handle action and deliver the necessary intensity without requiring extensive character development. The most distinctive casting decision involved Jason Lyles as the motion capture performer for George. At 6 foot 9, Lyles was selected in part because his height allowed the normal sized George to tower over Johnson's 6 foot 5 frame, establishing a visual hierarchy that would later invert when George grows to colossal proportions. Lyles' path to the role began with a recommendation from visual effects supervisor Colin Strauss, with whom he had worked on Death Note. After months of independent research into gorilla behavior, watching documentaries, studying Coco the gorilla and her interactions with Penny Patterson, visiting zoos, and examining behind the scenes material from the Planet of the Apes films and Peter Jackson's King Kong, Lyles trained intensively with Terry Notary. Notary, who had performed motion capture for Kong in Kong, Skull Island, and various apes in the Planet of the Apes series, conducted a test session that led to Lyles' hiring. The 3 weeks of training in the Santa Monica Mountains focused on shedding human mannerisms, eliminating polite eye contact, nodding, and other social cues, and developing the physical vocabulary of a gorilla, including knuckle walking, that left Lyles severely sore in previously unused muscle groups. Lyles's performance capture work extended beyond pure physicality. He performed sign language sequences with Johnson, requiring precise non-verbal communication that had to register emotionally even after digital transformation. Scenes depicting George's mutation involved Lyles sustaining extended panic attack performances, sometimes for 15 to 19 hours of takes, drawing on personal experiences to convey the creature's confusion and pain as its body rapidly expands. Lyle stayed in character between takes during particularly demanding sequences, adopting a method like intensity that director Brad Payton encouraged. The performance was later enhanced by Weta Digital, but foundational emotional and physical work remained Lyles's. Sky Notary and Willow Notary, daughters of Terry Notary, provided additional motion capture performances for female gorillas in sanctuary scenes, further grounding the animal world in real performer input. Denise Chamian served as the primary casting director, overseeing the assembly of both principal and supporting roles. Her work involved balancing star power with character driven performances capable of elevating a video game adaptation into a more emotionally resonant spectacle. Secondary casting contributions came from Tara Feldstein Bennett and Chase Paris. The process of filling the extensive supporting cast, reporters, military personnel, zoo staff, and uncredited background players required attention to both logistical needs for large scale action sequences and the creation of a lived in world. Actors such as Robin Meade as an HLN reporter, Chris Murphy and Maria Arcega Dunn as San Diego newscasters, and various Chicago based reporters provided the media framework that contextualizes the escalating crisis. Military and law enforcement roles were filled by a combination of experienced character actors and performers with authentic physical presence, ensuring that the institutional response felt credible even as the film prioritizes spectacle. The casting of the animal performers extended beyond George. While Ralph the wolf and Lizzie, the crocodile, relied more heavily on digital creation, the human performers interacting with the early non mutated versions of the animals had to sell the reality of those relationships. Johnson's scenes with Lyles required a level of commitment to the imaginary presence of a gorilla that only intensive rehearsal and mutual trust could achieve. Harris's interactions with the scientific and containment elements similarly demanded an actress who could treat the extraordinary as urgent and real. The overall ensemble was assembled with an eye toward tonal range. Johnson's earnest heroism, Harris's intelligent determination, Okerman and Lacey's theatrical villainy, Morgan's world-weary authority, and Lyles's transformative physical performance. Supporting players filled out the world without distracting from the central relationships. Production realities further shaped casting decisions. Filming took place primarily in Atlanta and Chicago, requiring local casting for many background roles and some supporting parts. The need for performers comfortable with extensive green screen work and practical effects. such as being grabbed by actors in green suits representing the growing animals, influenced selections toward actors experienced in effects heavy productions. Okerman, Harris, and Morgan have all spoken about the imaginative demands of performing opposite creatures that would only exist in post production, with Peyton providing iPad visualizations to help orient them. The physical demands on Lyles, including mountain training and prolonged emotional intensity, underscored the specialized nature of motion capture casting. The inclusion of real world journalists and newscasters in cameo capacities added a layer of verisimilitude to the media coverage of the events. Robin Mead's appearance as an HLN reporter, for example, leveraged her actual on air persona to make the broadcast elements feel authentic. Similar choices for local Chicago reporters grounded the climactic sequences in a recognizable media landscape. Uncredited roles filled by numerous performers. Zoo, visitors, military personnel, SWAT team members, and civilians created the necessary scale for the destruction sequences without requiring individual character development. Throughout the casting process, the production maintained a clear hierarchy of priorities. Johnson's presence as the emotional and physical center dictated the need for co stars who could match his intensity without competing for dominance. Harris's casting as a scientific equal, rather than a traditional sidekick, reflected an intentional recalibration of the action film gender dynamic. The villainy was split between Ackerman's calculating intelligence and Lacey's comic ineptitude, providing tonal variety. Morgan's government agent offered institutional texture, while Manganiello's private military leader supplied early physical conflict. Lyles's motion capture work ensured that George remained a character rather than a pure digital effect, preserving the emotional core of Okoi's relationship with the gorilla. Even as the creature transforms into a monster, the supporting ensemble was populated with actors capable of delivering specific functional needs. Exposition, comic relief, military credibility, scientific authority, while remaining subordinate to the central narrative. Burns, Nelson, and the sanctuary staff humanized the early sequences. The military and security performers provided the necessary opposition and alliance dynamics. The media figures contextualized the events for the audience. Every casting choice, from the highest profile stars to the briefest background appearances, was calibrated to support a film that balances video game spectacle with character driven stakes. Lyles's preparation process itself became a model of specialized casting. His independent research, subsequent training with Notary, and commitment to physical and emotional authenticity demonstrated the increasing sophistication of performance capture roles. The decision to cast a performer taller than the human lead for the premutation George sequences showed careful attention to visual storytelling. The later digital enlargement of the character retained the emotional foundation Lyles provided, ensuring continuity of performance across scales. Ockerman and Lacey's sibling dynamic was developed through casting chemistry rather than solely through writing. Their shared scenes allowed for banter and contrasting approaches to crisis that enriched the otherwise straightforward corporate villainy. Morgan's ability to shift between antagonism and reluctant alliance with Johnson and Harris gave the government response narrative flexibility. Harris's determination to avoid typecasting after her Oscar nominated work brought an additional layer of intentionality to the female lead, resulting in a character defined by competence and agency. The overall casting architecture of Rampage reflects a production aware of both the commercial requirements of a Dwayne Johnson vehicle and the narrative demands of a story centered on the bond between a man and a mutated animal. Every principal and supporting choice was made to serve that core relationship while delivering the expected spectacle of giant monsters rampaging through a major American city. The result is an ensemble that, while hierarchical, maintains consistency of tone and purpose across its many moving parts. Production development and pre production the road to bringing Rampage to the big screen stretched back nearly a decade before the film actually reached theaters. Warner Brothers first gained the rights to adapt the 1986 arcade classic Rampage in 2009 when the studio purchased Midway Games for $33 million. dollars. That deal folded a large catalog of arcade titles into Warner's holdings, and among them was the destructive, building smashing game that would eventually become a modern blockbuster. It would take roughly 2 more years before anyone made a formal move to turn the property into a movie. The adaptation was publicly announced in November 2011, with producer John Rickard attached to shepherd the project from the outset. Rickard later explained that his involvement came about almost by accident. He described combing through the full list of titles for which Warner Bros. Controlled adaptation rights, and when he came across Rampage, the memory of playing the arcade cabinet as a kid immediately came back to him. That nostalgic spark became the seed for what would eventually become a 9 figure studio tentpole. Nothing significant moved publicly for several years after the 2011 announcement until June 2015, when Dwayne Johnson was confirmed as the film's star. His attachment reunited him with New Line Cinema and producer Beau Flynn, both of whom had worked with him on other projects. And at the time of the announcement, the studio was still searching for a director, with hopes of beginning production sometime in the middle of 2016, a timeline that would ultimately slip by close to a year. Johnson spoke about his personal history with the source material, saying that he had loved the game in his youth, first playing it on an arcade machine inside a pool hall before eventually owning a copy for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That personal connection to the property was frequently cited in press materials as part of the appeal that drew him to the project before the screenplay that eventually became the shooting script was finalized. The studio and its producers considered numerous different takes on how to translate a game with an almost non existent plot into a feature film. Among the drafts pitched to the studio was a version that hewed closely to the game's original conceit, in which the monsters were reimagined as mutated human beings rather than animals. Ultimately, none of those competing drafts were chosen. Instead, the producers settled on a script from writer Ryan Engel, who wanted to craft what he called a tribute to the monster movies that shaped his own childhood, name checking films like Jaws and Jurassic Park as touchstones. At the same time, Engel was clear that he did not want audiences to view the rampaging animals themselves as heroic figures, a distinction that shaped the way the eventual film balanced sympathy for George the gorilla against the genuine devastation caused by the trio of mutated creatures. Once Johnson's involvement was locked in, the search for a director moved quickly. In July 2015, Brad Payton signed on to both direct and produce the film. This marked the third time Payton and Johnson would work together, following their earlier collaborations on Journey to The Mysterious Island in 2012 and San Andreas in 2015. That existing creative shorthand between star and director was viewed within the industry as a key reason Warner Brothers felt confident moving forward with such an expensive, effects heavy production. With the director in place, the supporting cast came together over the following several months, largely between January and July of 2017. Naomi Harris joined the production to play genetic engineer Kate Caldwell. Malin Akerman was cast as the film's primary antagonist. Energene CEO Claire Wyden and Jeffrey Dean Morgan signed on to portray Harvey Russell, a mysterious government operative. Jake Lacey was brought in to play Claire's brother Brett, described within the film as dim-witted and prone to nervous outbursts, while Joe Manganiello, Marley Shelton, PJ Byrne, Demetrius Gross, Jack Quaid, Brian Hill, Matt Gerald, Will Yun Lee, and mixed martial artist Urija Faber rounded out the ensemble in smaller roles, spanning mercenaries, scientists, and military personnel. The character of George, the film's leucistic gorilla protagonist, was brought to life through motion capture performed by Jason Lyles, while Sky Notary and Willow Notary handled motion capture for a pair of supporting gorillas named Femi and Inu, and Vincent Roxburgh contributed an uncredited motion capture performance as a young gorilla named Pavo. One notable footnote from this stage of development involves the film's financing. Rampage turned out to be the final Warner Bros. Release ever backed by Access Entertainment and Rat Pack Dune Entertainment. The studio severed ties with that financing partnership after sexual harassment allegations surfaced against Rat Pack Dune's owner, Brett Ratner, and as a result, Red Pack Dune's involvement in Rampage went entirely uncredited despite having help from the picture. The Red Pack Dune entity itself dissolved later that same year, making Rampage something of a quiet historical bookend to that once prominent Hollywood financing arrangement. Filming principal photography on Rampage officially began on April 17, 2017, in Chicago, Illinois. The choice of Chicago as a primary filming location was far from incidental. The city's distinctive skyline, and in particular its cluster of dense, architecturally significant skyscrapers, became central to the film's climactic third act, in which the mutated animals descend upon the downtown loop and level a significant portion of it. In addition to its Chicago location work, the production also filmed scenes in Atlanta, Georgia, which by the mid 2010s had become one of the most heavily used hubs for major studio blockbuster production in the United States, thanks to favorable tax incentives and an expanding base of soundstage infrastructure. Beyond the raw logistics of shooting a large scale disaster movie across two major American cities, the filmmakers used the production as an opportunity to sprinkle in a handful of affectionate nods to the original arcade game for longtime fans to spot. Inside the fictional headquarters of the villainous Energy Corporation, set dressers placed an actual Rampage arcade cabinet, a small in universe wink acknowledging the property's roots. Elsewhere, the filmmakers built in a more visceral reference. At one point, George pulls a person out of a building he is in the process of demolishing and eats them, a direct echo of the original game's mechanic in which the giant monsters devour fleeing civilians. Perhaps the most pointed of these references comes near the film's climax, when the villain Claire Wyden is devoured by George while wearing a red dress, a deliberate visual callback to the woman depicted on the arcade game's opening attract screen, who was likewise dressed in red. Post production. The bulk of the film's post production workload fell to visual effects house Weta Digital, the New Zealand studio long associated with large scale digital creature work on productions ranging from King Kong to the Planet of the Apes franchise. Effects supervisor Eric Winquist led a team that traveled to Chicago specifically to build a digital model of the Chicago Loop, the section of downtown that gets torn apart during the film's climactic battle between the military and the three mutated animals. To achieve the level of detail necessary for a convincing large scale destruction sequence, the crew immersed themselves in the practical realities of the buildings they would eventually digitally destroy, studying the specific materials and architectural styles used throughout the loop. The scale of this documentation effort was substantial. The team captured as many as 15,000 photographs using 3D scanning equipment, while additional motion cameras were deployed throughout downtown Chicago to capture the district from multiple angles and lighting conditions. To make the eventual destruction sequences feel grounded rather than cartoonish, Weta's artists drew on real world reference footage of large structures collapsing. They studied both the collapse of the World Trade Center towers in 2001 and footage of building implosions that occurred following the 2016 Kaikoura earthquake, a major seismic event that struck New Zealand not far from Weta's own home base in Wellington. According to the studio, one of the most difficult creative and technical problems the effects team had to solve was working out how the sheer weight and mass of three enormous city leveling monsters would realistically interact with and destroy a dense urban environment, since inaccurate physics in that kind of sequence tends to read as visually unconvincing even to casual viewers. Weta's prior experience on other massive digital apo projects gave the studio a considerable head start when it came to designing and animating George, because the studio had already built extensive pipelines and creature animation tools for King Kong, as well as The Rise of the Planet of the Apes, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and War for the Planet of the Apes films. Effects supervisor Eric Winquist noted that the team was able to bring George to life in considerably less time than a comparable project might have required a decade earlier. To further strengthen the performance work behind George, motion capture coach Terry Notary, himself deeply experienced in ape performance work, stepped away from his duties on Avengers, Infinity War, which happened to be shooting in Atlanta at the same time. In order to help guide Jason Lyles through his motion capture performance as George, interestingly, the film's other two monsters, the wolf like Ralph and the crocodile like Lizzie, were not built using motion capture at all. That absence of a live performance reference turned out to be something of a creative advantage rather than a limitation, since it allowed the animation teams considerably more freedom to invent exaggerated, fantastical physical traits for those creatures that wouldn't have been possible to capture from a human performer. The result included features such as a wolf equipped with porcupine like quills and bat style wings, giving Ralph a far more monstrous, otherworldly silhouette than a straightforward wolf transformation might have produced. While Weta Digital handled the lion's share of the effects workload, the studio was not alone in bringing the film's visuals to completion. Additional visual effects companies, including Hydraulics, Scanline VFX, and UPP, also contributed work to the finished picture, helping to manage the massive volume of effects shots required across a film built almost entirely around large scale creature and destruction sequences. Music composer Andrew Lockington was responsible for scoring Rampage, marking the fourth time he had worked with director Brad Payton on a feature film, a collaborative relationship that had developed steadily across the director's earlier projects. In addition to Lockington's orchestral score, the film's soundtrack package included an exclusive song contributed by musician Kid Cudi titled The Rage, which plays over the film's end credits. The full soundtrack, combining Lockington's score with the Kid Cudi track, was released digitally on April 13, 2018, the same day the film opened in the United States through Water Tower Music, the in house music label associated with Warner Bros. Alongside the traditional score and soundtrack release. The film's marketing also extended into interactive promotional tie ins designed to invoke the spirit of the original arcade property. Three separate games were produced as part of this promotional push. The first was a browser based game called Rampage City Smash, playable directly online without any special hardware. The second was a physical arcade cabinet, functioning more like a redemption style game, the kind of arcade experience that rewards players with tickets for prizes, which was made available at Dave and Buster's locations. The third was a free virtual reality experience called Project Rampage VR, giving players a more immersive way to engage with the film's giant monster premiere ahead of the theatrical release. Release theatrical Rampage opened in the United States on April 13, 2018, distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. The film's release date had not originally been set for that weekend. It was initially scheduled to open a week later on April 20. That plan changed after Marvel Studios moved up the release of Avengers Infinity War by a week, shifting it earlier to April 27. In response, Warner Brothers adjusted Rampage's own release date to April 13, giving the Dwayne Johnson vehicle a 2 week buffer before what was expected to be one of the biggest box office events of the year. In something of a coincidence, Rampage's release also landed just 3 weeks after Pacific Rim Uprising, another American giant monster film, meaning moviegoers had two large scale kaiju adjacent blockbusters in theaters within a short span of each other that spring. Home media following its theatrical run, Rampage made its way to home viewing formats over the summer of 2018. The film became available for purchase on digital HD on June 26, 2018, giving audiences an early digital option before the full suite of physical media releases arrived several weeks later. On July 17, 2018, the film was released more broadly across a wide range of physical formats, including 4K Ultra HD, Blu ray 3D, standard Blu ray, and DVD, offering consumers several different tiers of picture and audio quality depending on their home setup. In terms of physical sales performance, Rampage went on to sell a reported $28.7 million worth of DVDs and Blu ray discs across North America, a solid, if unspectacular haul, reflecting the broader industry wide decline in physical media sales that most theatrical blockbusters experienced during that period, as digital and streaming options increasingly took precedence for casual home viewers. Reception box Office Rampage performed strongly during its theatrical run, ultimately grossing $101 million in the United States and Canada, alongside $327 million from international markets, for a worldwide total of $428 million. That total came against a production budget reported at $120 million with Warner Bros. Reportedly spending an additional $140 million on marketing the film globally. Despite the film's substantial worldwide haul, industry trade outlet deadline. Hollywood reported that Rampage was likely to only break even roughly 2 years after its theatrical release, once all revenue streams, including home media, television licensing, and other ancillary income, were fully accounted for, underscoring just how expensive modern effects driven blockbusters had become to produce and promote relative to their theatrical grosses alone. In North America specifically, Rampage opened the same weekend as horror film Truth or Dare and family film Sergeant Stubby, an American hero, while animated feature Isle of Dogs also expanded into wide release that same frame. Prior to opening, industry trackers had projected the film would earn somewhere between $35 million and $40 million from roughly 3,950 theaters over its debut weekend. The film's actual performance landed close to those projections. It earned $11, $5 million on its first day of release, a total that included $2.4 million generated from Thursday night preview screenings, followed by $13.9 million on Saturday. Across the full 3 day frame, the film totaled $35.7 million, comfortably enough to claim first place at the domestic box office in its opening weekend. As had become a familiar pattern for films headlined by Dwayne Johnson, Rampage's opening weekend audience skewed notably diverse. Demographic breakdowns from its debut showed the crowd was 43% Caucasian, 21% Hispanic, 19% African American, and 14% Asian, a spread that industry analysts frequently pointed to as evidence of Johnson's broad cross demographic box office appeal. The film's box office trajectory after opening weekend followed a fairly typical pattern for a big budget spring blockbuster without franchise brand recognition behind it. In its second weekend, the film dropped 41% to $21 million, which was enough to land it in second place behind A Quiet Place, itself then in its third week of release and continuing to perform strongly. By its third weekend, Rampage fell more sharply, dropping 64% to $7.1 million and slipping to fourth place. The decline moderated somewhat in the following weeks. The film fell 35% in its fourth weekend to $4.6 million, landing in fifth place, before dropping just 27% in its fifth weekend to $3.3 million, finishing seventh for that frame, a comparatively gentler decline, suggesting the film had found a stable, if shrinking, audience willing to see it in its later weeks of release. Critical response Rampage received what is generally characterized as a mixed critical reception upon release, with reviewers largely split between viewing the film as an enjoyably dumb popcorn spectacle and dismissing it as a hollow, overly familiar exercise in CGI driven destruction. On the review aggregation site, Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 51% based on 283 collected reviews with an average score of 5.3 out of 10. The site's official critical consensus describes the film as falling short of the fun found in its source material, while suggesting that its unrestrained, chaotic energy could still satisfy audiences looking for an unpretentious blockbuster. Notably, at the time of its release, Rampage became the best reviewed live action video game adaptation in the history of Rotten Tomatoes tracking, a distinction it held on to until the release of Pokemon Detective Pikachu the following year, which eventually surpassed it. On Metacritic, which aggregates scores on a weighted numeric scale, the film earned a score of 45 out of 100 based on input from 46 critics. A result the site classifies as indicating mixed or average reviews. Audience reaction, as measured through exit polling services, skewed considerably more positive than the critical consensus. CinemaScore polling gave the film an average grade of A minus on the service's letter grade scale that runs from A plus down to F, while the post-track exit survey service reported strongly positive marks from moviegoers, with adult filmgoers giving the film an overall positive score of 90% and younger filmgoers registering an overall positive score of 86%. Individual critical reviews reflected the broader split captured in the aggregate scores, Variety's Peter DeBruge offered a moderately positive assessment of the film, arguing that despite the film being highly derivative of past disaster and monster movies, it understood exactly who its audience was, pointing to fans of the Transformers franchise, as well as younger viewers born after the September 11 attacks, for whom sequences depicting skyscrapers toppling would carry no real world emotional weight. DeBruge also praised director Brad Peyton's technical execution, suggesting that whatever the film lacked in artistic ambition, Peyton more than compensated for through his skill in managing such a heavily CGI dependent production. Brian Tallarico, writing for RogerEbert.com, awarded the film 2.5 out of 4 stars. Tallarico's review acknowledged a genuine, if uneven, sense of enjoyment in the film's central spectacle, noting that there's undeniably goofy fun to be had. Whenever Dwayne Johnson leans into his familiar action star persona and the giant animals face off against one another, though he cautioned that viewers would need patience to get through the film's slower stretches. A review from the Russian genre publication Mir Fantastiki was somewhat more forgiving in tone, awarding the film 7 out of 10 and framing it as a film that was openly, unapologetically unintelligent, but one that succeeded at delivering exactly the kind of experience it promised without pretending to be something more substantial. Not every review was so charitable. Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune was among the film's harsher critics, awarding it just 1.5 out of 4 stars. His review described the film as tedious, noting that during his viewing, he had jotted down a two-word phrase expressing his frustration on 3 separate occasions, underlining it more emphatically each time as his patience wore thin. Nick Allen, writing for The Hollywood Reporter, focused much of his critique on what he characterized as the film's disastrous tonal balance. Allen argued that despite prominently featuring Rampage arcade cabinets within the villain's headquarters as a nod to its origins, Brad Peyton's live action adaptation ultimately came across as emotionally shallow and, at times, unpleasantly mean spirited, especially notable for what was ostensibly a big budget B movie meant to be enjoyed lightheartedly. Empire magazine's review, written by Ollie Richards, took a more affectionately conflicted stance, framing the project as a quintessential Dwayne Johnson vehicle. The review conceded that the film's premise sounded like a dreadful foundation for a movie, while also allowing that the finished product managed to be entertaining despite that. Empire further observed that the film was less self aware and tongue in cheek than many viewers might have expected going in, ultimately summarizing the experience as enjoyable, if not quite as big, silly, or fun as it could have been. Beyond traditional film criticism, Rampage also picked up attention on the award circuit aimed at younger audiences. The film received 3 nominations at the 2018 Teen Choice Awards, including a nomination in the Choice Sci-Fi Movie category, as well as individual acting nominations for Dwayne Johnson in the Choice Sci-Fi Movie Actor category and Naomie Harris in the Choice Sci-Fi Movie Actress category. The film's reception wasn't confined strictly to reviews and audience polling. It also became entangled in a minor public dispute prior to its release. In late March 2018, German filmmaker Uwe Boll, well known within genre film circles for his often poorly received video game movie adaptations, threatened legal action against Warner Brothers over the film's title. Ball had previously written, produced, and directed his own unrelated Rampage trilogy centered on a spree killing character whose worldview was said to reflect Ball's own political views. Ball argued that the Warner Brothers film risked shrinking the brand recognition and future revenue potential of his own franchise, and further criticized the studio's film as being confusing to audiences and dismissively described it as a typical feel good, crowd pleasing popcorn movie. The dispute did not ultimately prevent the film's release under its intended title. Talk of a potential sequel began circulating well before the film even reached theaters, as early as July 2017. While the film was still in production, Dwayne Johnson publicly discussed the possibility of a follow up and even floated the idea of offering an appearance role to YouTube personality Mike Matei. By the time the film opened in April 2018, director Brad Peyton confirmed that he would be open to returning to direct a sequel, and revealed that a rough concept for a follow up story had already been mapped out internally. Johnson, reflecting on his ongoing creative partnership with Peyton across multiple films, spoke positively about their working relationship and expressed enthusiasm for continuing to collaborate on future projects together. The subject resurfaced years later in December 2021 when producer Hiram Garcia confirmed that Warner Brothers Pictures remained interested in moving forward with a sequel, though he noted that Seven Bucks Productions, the production company co founded by Johnson, had deprioritized active development on the follow up in favor of other projects on its slate at the time.